Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Carino. And on today's episode, we have Tony Massenburg joining the show. Tony played basketball at the University of Maryland back in the 80s with the late, great Len Bias before playing 13 years in the NBA, winning a championship with the 2005 San Antonio Spurs. He also has co-authored a book with former NBA player Walt Williams about Len Bias called Lessons from Lenny. So without further ado, please welcome Tony Massenburg. And, it's been fun because I've had a lot of the former 80s and 90s guys follow the page, and it's kind of cool to bring back the memories. And I post about everybody. So a lot of pages just post about, Jordan or the bigger guys, but I post everybody because I grew up in that era and I knew every roster of every team. And back then we had to get the magazines and study the magazines. And when there was trades, we'd scratch guys' names. I was a kid back then, 10, 12 years old. So, the 90s era to me is a special era. And you got to play through, it was really kind of a transitional era, the 80s and 90s that got us to where we are now. And it was what brought the NBA to what it is now, which is a global sport. And, it's one of the biggest sports in the world. And your era is what really got it there.
I feel about it. I always say, I tease my son. I always say, hey, listen, man, you guys are just benefiting from what me and my crew started. We were the guys, we were there with the greatest in MJ. I played basketball in college in the 80s with Len Bias, for 1 year, my freshman year, but 80s basket, everybody knows what late 80s college basketball was and 90s NBA basketball. And you said it, I was one of the few guys who was fortunate enough to be able to transition from the 90s into the mid 2000s. And that's when, I saw the change coming with LeBron James and Carmelo. And I'm like, okay, these guys are like, 6'8", and they're like handling the basketball, they're shooting threes, they do everything. And I was like, so this is where the game is going.
Tony, did you ever see like Steph Curry and the Warriors now? Did you ever see the 3-pointer becoming that big?
I never thought that. I knew that the game was expanding. Like I said, when I saw those guys, when I started to see guys that were, pretty close to my size doing stuff that like they would never let me do that. So, and I couldn't do it as well as they did it anyway, because it was, they came up different. They trained different. Like they were, when I came up, if you were over 6'3" or 6'4", you were a center. That's it. You were a center and nothing else. And so I was 6'6" by the time I was 14, 15 years old. So I had to learn how to, play with my back to the basket. That's just the way the game was. And I saw these I call them hybrid group of new guys who are big, strong, and athletic, but they can play like guards. And I was like, that's where the basket, the game is going. But I did not see the 3-pointer coming like this.
I mean, it's really changed the game. I mean, they, in the last 10 years, I've never seen anything like it. And not just the pro level, but down all the little league, college, high school, everyone shoots threes now. I mean, it's all they do is shoot threes. So it's been an incredible change.
In the NBA, and in the NBA, the best league in the world sets the pace for how everybody wants to play.
Yep, no question about that. And I want to, I'm actually from Cleveland, so I got to see all the LeBron years early on. I remember hearing about him in high school because my brother was a high school coach. And, we didn't know how good he would be because you hear a lot of hype about certain guys, but he obviously living up to the hype, and he was, he's been incredible. So I kind of have a unique perspective on Jordan and LeBron because we competed against Jordan in the 90s with the Price and Doherty and those guys and Ron Harper in the late 80s. And then we saw LeBron here. So we got to see both of those guys pretty, up close and personal in Cleveland. And I mean, two of the great, arguably the two greatest I've ever seen, or at least two of the greatest I've ever seen. Jordan, I've never seen a competitor quite like Jordan. I think he's at a different level, but the changing of the game, like you said, from your days to the LeBron Carmelo days to now with Steph and all these guys shooting threes, it's been fun to watch, and it's such a different game than it was when you played. But I want to take us back to your youth, and where did you grow up, and who were your favorite teams and players back then?
Well, going back to junior high, elementary school, high school, I grew up in Southern Virginia, and I grew up, and a lot of people say, oh, you're from the DMV, huh? And I'm like, not quite. The DMV is DC, Maryland, and Virginia, but that part of Virginia, they consider Northern Virginia part of DC. And it is. It's, literally, 15 to 20 minutes outside of DC, and you're in Northern Virginia. But I grew up down south, which is about 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours south of here, and pretty close to the North Carolina line. So being that I was so close to the North Carolina line, I actually grew up a Carolina fan. Partly because of my high school coach, who was from North Carolina, and we actually ran UNC's system in high school. Our coach would routinely take us down to watch Dean Smith in Carolina practices, and I was actually at the practice. One of my, many stories that I tell along about my, my basketball journey. I was actually at the practice when Michael Jordan broke his hand his freshman year.
Wow.
At that practice. And, we were all disappointed because he did it like not even 25, minutes into practice. He broke his hand because, we were looking forward to seeing him do some dunks. And I was impressed with the likes of Sam Perkins and James Worthy. And of course, a lot of admiration and respect for Dean Smith. Even back then, we recognized his greatness as high schoolers. And so this is probably in ninth, 10th grade. And then along, my 10th grade year, along comes this guy named Len Bias, who I had never seen anything like. 6'8", 40-inch vertical, one of the most graceful athletes you'd ever seen. Explosive, strong around the basket. And he wasn't a center, he was a forward. And so for me, at that time, being young and looking at guys like James Worthy and Michael Jordan and Dr. J being my, my all-time idol at that time. Like, he was the guy. Like, I idolized Dr. J. That's really who I wanted to be, as an 8th, 9th grader. And so around the 10th, 11th grade, like I said, I see this guy named Len Bias at the University of Maryland. And then they win the ACC. And at that time, Jefferson Pilot Sports, Raycom Sports was like where you saw all the ACC games. And at that time, the ACC was clearly the best college basketball conference in the country. And Len Bias was one of the most dominant players in that conference, even as a sophomore and junior. So I was enamored by his game and drawn to him because I said, that's what I want to be as a player. I want to be a forward that can play inside, that can shoot jump shots, and be athletic and play well in transition. And so I actually got recruited by the University of Maryland my junior year and was at 5-star basketball camp, which is like the biggest basketball camp. Still is, I think, to this maybe still is to this day. I don't know if they've been taken over by like Nike or Under Armour, those places. But at that time, 5-star was where all the top high schoolers were. And so I went there as a little, kid straight out of the country. Nobody really knew me, no internet or anything like that. So, word traveled slow about players. And I made a good showing and caught the attention of Sherman Dillard, an assistant coach for the University of Maryland, who would later introduce me to Lefty Driesell, and which was a huge moment for me at 5-star when I was actually able to meet Lefty and shake his hand and have him tell me he was interested in having me come to the University of Maryland.
Wow, that had to be incredible. And at that time, was Len the biggest player in college basketball? Him and, this is right after MJ, or was MJ still at Carolina?
Already, at this point, by the time Lefty started recruiting me, MJ was a rookie in the NBA, I believe, at that time. Okay. So Bias was the player of the year his junior year, which was my sophomore year, I believe. And so my junior year, Lenny's going, let me get this straight. I'm going into my junior year, I get recruited by Lefty. Lenny is a sophomore. So Lenny's a sophomore at that time, going into his junior year. And he would be player of the year and was all ACC his sophomore year in that tournament. He stood out, and they won the ACC tournament that year. That's when Bias really broke onto the scene his sophomore year. And so caught my attention and everybody else. And so when Lefty, comes up to me and he says, hey, I'm interested in you coming to University of Maryland, son. I want you to, you remind me of Buck Williams, son. You could be All-American like Leonard Bias. He's giving me that whole spiel, and I'm sitting there just literally eating it all up and trying to show how, over the top excited I am to be talking to him, because the University of Maryland was the school I really wanted to go to, but I couldn't let the coach know that right off, that he had me in the bag. So We went through the process, but I would eventually, sign with the University of Maryland not too long after meeting him at 5-star.
Okay. And, because around that time, like my brother was a very good college basketball or high school and college basketball player back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was in Ohio at the time. So he was a leading scorer in the city of Cleveland back in the early 90s. So I grew up, he was 10 years older than me. So Tony, I grew up hearing all these names when I was a little kid. So, it was all about basketball. It's all we did is watch basketball. So he grew up a Showtime Lakers fan and, of course, a Cleveland fan because we were in Cleveland. So from college to the NBA, I knew all these guys, and he played in tournaments against the Fab Five. That was his era. He was in '91 when he graduated, so it was all Fab Five and those guys. But I remember hearing about Len Bias all the time, and I also have a ton of family up in Boston, and they were devastated, obviously, when Len passed away. And I was a little kid, but I remember, years later, my uncle's telling me, "Oh my God, if we could have had Reggie Lewis and Len Bias together, that could have carried that on for years after Larry and those guys were, left."
I mean, literally, I always say to people when they ask me, how good was Len Bias? And I would say to them, he was good enough that Michael Jordan wouldn't have 6 rings right now.
Wow.
He would have some rings, but he wouldn't have 6 because he would have had to go through Boston, and a talent like Lenny, being cultivated by veterans like Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Danny Ainge, Red Auerbach, Casey Jones. I mean, they would have made him into the perfect basketball player. And he was pretty damn close as it already was. So if he just would have gotten those veterans around him to really, cement what it is to win at the highest level, there's no doubt in my mind, his competitive drive equals that of a Michael Jordan. He had that same type of dog mentality, like I want to win and I'm going to bring everybody along for the ride, and I'm going to hold my teammates accountable, and everything that I within my grasp I'm going to do to try to win. And he had this aura about him that when he was there, you were like, okay, we've got an ace. Nobody else has an ace in the hole. We have an ace in the hole. And that for every night we step on the court, we got a chance to win.
Wow. And for the younger generation that never got to see him play, even me, I was only 3 years old when he passed away. Describe to the younger generation, who would he be like today? Or give us a couple players, a couple comps that he would be like.
That's the funny thing. Everybody has somebody that is similar to them. Len Bias is one of the most unique guys I've ever met in my life. One of the most unique players I've ever played with. I can't sit here and tell you of a guy right now, even to this day, 36 years later, who is in the mold of Len Bias. The only thing that I can say to help young people understand it is that imagine Michael Jordan being 2 inches taller and with a slightly better jump shot. Wow. Not the passer that MJ is, not the passer. And MJ, by the way, learned to pass. MJ was not a great passer coming into the NBA. He learned that. Len Bias was 6'8", bigger and stronger than Michael Jordan, 40-inch, vertical the same way, and was a better shooter of the basketball at the college level than Michael Jordan was at the college level. So the way I sum it up is I said, just think of MJ just bigger and stronger.
Almost like MJ in a LeBron James body.
Yeah, it's like the MJ in a LeBron James body. And again, I look at him, and when he died, he was probably about 220, 225, but he was chiseled, all muscle. He was 21, 22 years old. You have to believe that once his grown man body would have kicked in, because again, as much of a grown man as he looked like in college, he was only 22 years old. So for me, I'm thinking, his 220 to 225, by the time you give him 3 to 4 years in the NBA on the professional regimen of eating and lifting and doing what's necessary, and the competitive drive that he had to just be better, he could have easily been 240 pounds. Playing a small forward position between 3 and 4, shooting 3-pointers, while at the same time dominating inside, as with his back to the basket, and being one of the most fiery competitors that we've ever seen. I mean, you know, is there a 6'8", 240, maybe 240 plus pound forward in the NBA with a 40 plus inch vertical who shoots 3-pointers and also plays with his back to the basket? Is there a guy like that right now?
I mean, the only one you could think of even close would be LeBron. But besides that, you know, yeah.
LeBron. And we had a discussion about Len Bias. I actually gave LeBron a copy of the book at a game when I was at a Wizards game, and got in the back and was able to talk to him. And he asked me, he said, you know, how good was he really? I said, honestly, I said, you were probably the closest thing that I have seen to him, you know, at your size. And you were actually a little bit bigger than him, you know, when you came into the NBA. I say, but for the time period, there was nobody like Len Bias. Explosive like Dominique Wilkins, feathery jump shot, you know, like a two guard, you know, like any guard that you can think of that can really stroke the ball from behind the 3-point line. Great catch and shoot player. He shot like a guard, played like, you know, with his back to the basket as well as any power forward you'll see, and in transition was spectacular. He was just a one-off. You know, I think Dominique Wilkins is close, maybe more so than LeBron, because Dominique was not a great ball handler. Neither was Lenny. Lenny was a 3-dribble guy, but at the time, 6'8" guys didn't handle the basketball like that. Mm-hmm. So he 3 dribbles, I will raise up, you know, 34, 36 inches off the floor on my jump shot on a consistent basis at 6'8". I mean, he would literally rise up over 7-foot guys and shoot that feathery, soft jump shot. And it was just unstoppable. And he was also able to play, you know, his back to the basket, shoot turnaround jump shots, jump hooks. The elevation that he got every time he left the floor is what really enabled him to just be dominant over pretty much anybody. You were either not big enough, if you were his size or smaller, you were not big and strong enough to guard him, or if you were big and strong enough, you were not quick enough. And you know, and if you had those two things going, you probably vertically could not compete with him because of the 40 plus inch vertical at 6'8". So I just have never really seen that combination anywhere outside of Dominique Wilkins, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. He's that caliber of athlete.
That's incredible. And where do you put defensively? How was Lenny? Like, where would you put him defensively?
Tenacity. You know, he was a good defensive player. I wouldn't say he was a great defensive player, but he was great when he needed to be defensively. Again, another sign of greatness. I may not be able to do certain things all the time in the basketball game, but when you need me to make a play, whether it's on the offensive end or the defensive end, he could block shots when he wanted to, because again, at 6'8", with a 40 plus inch vertical, he could literally get his entire arm over the rim. I mean, there are pictures of Len Bias in the 80s with his head at the rim at a time when we didn't see guys with heads at the rim. And Len Bias could consistently get his head to the rim. So when he made up his mind that he was going to come weak side and block somebody's shot, you can Google the footage and see him doing that, and you can see the elevation that he gets. I mean, it's just unbelievable what he could do and the type of physical specimen he was. It's just incredible. And you combine that with the competitive drive, that's what enabled him to be a great defensive player. He wasn't great, meaning I'm a lockdown guy, but he was not an easy guy to score on. And when the game got tight, when he needed to make a defensive stop, he was able to do that.
Well, and as you said, Tony, playing with the Celtics, if he would have played with them for a period of years, I mean, he would have learned from Parrish and Bird and McHale and those guys how to play defense, what position to be in, because Larry wasn't a very athletic guy. I had Michael Cooper on the podcast, and Coop was telling me, he's like, Larry couldn't jump over a pop can, but yet he always was in the right position, knew what to do, you know. So they would have taught Lenny how to do all that. And I'm sure he would have been, I can't imagine what he would have been, honestly. And you know, from how you describe him, I wish you know, from a spoiled perspective, that I could have watched him against the Michael Jordans and Akeem Olajuwons and all these guys that would, you know, in that era. And that would have been, you know, how great would the NBA if he would have been there competing against MJ in the East with all the other guys that were, you know.
Would have been unbelievable. unbelievable, because you're talking about a Michael Jordan type talent in Boston being fooled by the likes of Larry Bird, who was, trending, on the downside of his career because of injuries. That's all, just because of injuries. That speaks to how great Larry was, to the fact that I'm saying Larry was literally on the downside of his career in 1986. And you consider that he was on that 1992 Dream Team. Even with those injuries, he was still one of the best in the world. So if he could have just put a little bit of that into Len Bias, who already had the killer instinct, who already had the drive, who already had the nasty, and already had the will to win. If you surround him by literally NBA Hall of Famers, all-time greats, guys who have competitive fire, who are literally assassins on the court, Len Bias would have been, without question in my mind, that rival that MJ never truly had, because either people were not talented enough basketball-wise, or people were not mentally tough enough to compete with him. The one thing that he would have had in a rival in Len Bias is he would have had equal athleticism, equal basketball ability, meaning the ability to impact the game consistently and be the best player on the floor, and a competitive drive that says he will not succumb. He will not quit. He's not going to lay down and die. You got to kill him. And that's who Michael Jordan is. He is a competitor to the likes which we've never seen. But Len Bias also had that exact same type of competitive fire.
Wow, it's incredible hearing this, and what? Because again, I was a little kid then. A lot of people watching this have never seen Len play. They've seen highlights. We've seen the YouTube highlights and everything, but we never really seen him play. So to hear it firsthand from someone that knew him and someone that was there and seen this is really powerful stuff. And I think it's really key for the young fans watching to go back and do a little history on Len, because again, you're talking about a guy who would have been one of the all-time greats who never got a chance to show that, obviously, but. I think just for me, I keep thinking of how great would that have been to have him in that era. That was already a great era to begin with, the 80s and 90s, but to have him, that would have taken it. You already had the Showtime Lakers, Celtics, the Bad Boys, Jordan, Akeem, all those guys. You add him in there. That's just, I can't imagine what it would have been like.
Well, I tell people, just think about who Red Auerbach was, right? And the orchestrator of talent that he was. And you can go and Google the video. He said he schemed for 3 years to get Len Bias, because he recognized what it was when he saw it. They moved up in the draft. They traded away valuable pieces after winning the championship the year before. They won the championship and then basically positioned themselves to move up in the draft so that they could draft what Red Auerbach thought was unquestionably one of the best talents he had ever seen, and the best talent in the draft. The only reason Len Bias went second in the 1986 NBA draft is because the Cleveland Cavaliers needed a center, and they chose Brad Daugherty. And so they went with the center. But everybody who is associated with that draft will acknowledge to a man that Len Bias was the best player in that draft, and that was a talented draft.
Wow. And I didn't realize it was by Cavaliers that had the first pick. You're right. Daugherty was picked in 86. Yeah.
But they had the first pick. They took a center because that's what they needed.
And at that time, centers, everyone, it just seems like that.
Yep. Big man. That's the other thing I tell people. Len Bias was ahead of his time as a basketball player. He was ahead of his time. There were no 6'8" guys shooting jump shots, in 1985 out to a three-point line that did not exist in college basketball. See, that's the thing. He averaged 26 points a game, 27 points a game his senior year, shooting jump shots and playing inside. But the jump shots that he was taking from the corners and the jump shots he was taking at the top of the key would be three-point shots in college basketball today if they had a three-point line at that time. So that 27 points could have easily been over 30 when you consider what he was doing. And he was doing that in what was clearly the far and best college basketball conference in America, the ACC at that time. In the mid-'80s, early '80s, the ACC was the premier basketball conference in the country, and he dominated that conference, not this just 1 year, but 2 years.
Wow. I mean, just hearing all this is just awesome. Just to hear his legacy and what he was really all about. And, and you mentioned a good point about how the centers kind of ruled back then. Even in 2007, you remember the Blazers took Greg Oden over Durant, because that's how it was. Even 15 years ago, it was still valuable. And now, of course, it's different. But so, I kind of look at Len as that, Len and Durant kind of similar, where they should have really both been number one. But at the time, the center was, that was the thing to do. So I want to take it because I'm going to get back to Len.
But either.
What'd you say?
And let's remember, Michael Jordan didn't go number one. He acknowledges he didn't go number one. Sam Bowie was the number one pick in his draft.
That's true. Very true. Yeah. And you look back, and there's a lot of drafts. I think I look back now and you realize that the big man was taken over somebody that was obviously, more talented, but very interesting stuff. And I'm going to get back to Len a little bit later, but I want to go over your career at Maryland. And I know at the end of your career, you played for the great Gary Williams, and you had, I think, 3 different coaches during that time. So take us through those coaches, and then take us through what it was like playing for Gary Williams. Of course, he ended up winning a championship in 2002 with Steve Francis and those boys. Or I'm sorry, not Steve Francis. It was
Juan Dixon. Steve Francis was there.
Yes, Juan Dixon. That's what I'm thinking of. Yep. And Will Cox, I think, was on that team, and a couple of the guys. Yep.
Blake, these guys. So my freshman year obviously was a dream. Because I got to play with my idol, Len Bias, and I had a ton of respect for Lefty Driesell. And so to be at the University of Maryland as a kid from Virginia, who had some, I had a lot of options of schools, but, my heart was set in College Park. And once I took my couple of visits actually, met Lenny, met Keith Gatlin, took tours around campus and hung out with the team a little bit and just really got a feel for it. I was sold. I had 5 visits, as every college basketball player had at the time. You get your traditional, you got to narrow it down to 5 schools that you can visit. And the University of Maryland was the 3rd school on the list that I visited. Just fell in that order. And after visiting, I canceled the other 2 visits, committed to Maryland, and said, you know what, there's no point in me going to these other schools when I know where my heart is. I want to go play with Len Bias for a year and learn from him. And I want to play for Lefty Driesell, as my coach. And so we had a pretty good freshman year. We got knocked out by UNLV in the 2nd round. And Len would obviously go on to be drafted number 2 by the Celtics. And so upon his passing, a couple of days later, clearly, everything took a turn for the worse at the University of Maryland. And so those next 3 years, I actually sat out my sophomore year. I did not play my sophomore year following Len Bias's death. A lot of things going on, and just a real transitional period for everybody on the team. We had a couple of guys transfer. They hired Bob Wade, who was an inner city coach at Dunbar High School from Baltimore, had an excellent record, had coached the likes of Reggie Lewis and Muggsy Bogues and David Wingate and Reggie Williams, and clearly had 4 first-round picks on his high school basketball team. So clearly, knew how to cultivate talent. And within 2 years, Bob Wade assembled a roster in 1988, 87, 88 season. They did not win a single ACC game in 1986, the year that I set out. 0-16, I think it was that year, and in the conference. And the next season, Bob Wade put a team on the floor, a roster that had 7 McDonald's All-Americans on it. We had a couple of guys who were All-Americans who stayed, like Derek Lewis and Steve Hood. We got Brian Williams, the late Bison Dele. A lot of people don't know that Brian Williams, aka Bison Dele, played 1 year at the University of Maryland.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't. And so that was his freshman year. So Bob Wade was able to lure, a top 10 college high schooler from California to the East Coast to play for the University of Maryland. I was actually thrilled because at that time I had, that year I sat out I dedicated myself to my academics and refocusing, and also becoming the best basketball player that I could be. I actually grew an inch and gained about 25 pounds, just working in the weight room, eating, and basically, my year away from basketball was working out with the football team. They were my friends. We all got along as it was, basketball team, football team. We were all boys, so it was no issue there. A lot of them were actually high school basketball players. So they all, we played basketball together in the summertime and stuff. So it was nothing for me to start working out with them and playing with them. And I left out a 6'8", 215-pound freshman. And the next time the University of Maryland fans saw me, I was a 6'9", 235-pound sophomore who made himself into a much better player, stopped growing vertically and started to fill out and got stronger and really had dedicated myself to my craft of that was my way of trying to heal from the loss of Len Bias. It was to just try to do my imitation of him and make myself into the kind of player that I thought he would want me to be. And I was trying to be like him. I wanted to develop my game to the point where I could be like Len Bias. And so, like a lot of guys, I fell short of being able to do everything that he could do. But I found myself in the pursuit of trying to be like him. And so I ended up having a pretty good career under Bob Wade was there. I ended up being a starter on that team that featured 7 McDonald's All-Americans. And that team in 87, 88, and a lot of people don't know this either, we actually made it to the second round of the NCAAs. After, not being on anybody's radar, we were ranked, in the country. We were beating ranked teams, and we ultimately lost in the first round, I believe, to Kentucky. Rex Chapman was their guy, and we ended up losing to them. But the fact that we had went through, me and my freshman and sophomore teammates, the fact that a lot of us had went through what was at that time the worst tragedy in the history of college basketball a year before that. And for us to literally be able to turn it back around. Len Bias dies on June 19th, 1986. By the spring of 1987, we were going to the tournament. So that's, I think, a pretty miraculous turnaround in a very short period of time from, like I said, what was the biggest tragedy in college basketball at that time. So and then later on, our junior year, we'd have some issues. Some guys would transfer. There were, a lot of people not happy with Bob Wade, and there were some things that were happening that would, violated some NCAA rules. And so my junior year, after my junior year, actually, a lot of guys transferred, and we struggled my junior year. And Bob Wade was ultimately fired. And then going into my senior year, in comes Gary Williams. And so now Gary inherits a team that, again, we had some walk-ons. We had to get some walk-ons on that team because we had so many guys to transfer. But Gary will tell you, even on that roster, my senior year, we had 4 guys who would have NBA experience. 3 guys would get drafted. 1 guy would, get half a year or so in the NBA, I think, in Cedric Lewis. And so we had a decent team. We lost in the NIT, but we really should have gotten an NCAA bid that year. And because of the sanctions that were ultimately coming down from Bob Wade's era, because of some improprieties, like giving kids a ride to class, these are the type of things that Bob Wade was ultimately kicked out of basketball for, which is laughable now.
It's laughable.
Yeah, to what is going on. But that's another story. But in comes Gary, and so for me, I'm a senior, and I'm embracing him because he's an ex-Maryland guy, and he's got a great reputation coming from Ohio State. And I thought that he was, a great guy to move the program forward. And obviously, he did. So my career, I may be one of the only guys to play for three coaches at the same university um, throughout his career, and so that change, I think, that constant change and the scrutiny um, really prepared me to play in the NBA, because I would go on to play for 12 teams in the NBA, and that's a scenario where you don't really have time to figure it out. You just got to show up and produce, and that's kind of what my career was like at Maryland. Show up and produce, and put up, no matter what the circumstances are, you got to play. And not only do you have to play, you have to play well.
Well, and I want to get to, the 1990 draft. And it's funny, you mentioned the 12 different teams. Anytime I post about you on my page, I always have a couple people respond saying, he has the NBA record, or he's tied for the NBA record for most teams played, and I actually never knew that until the guys on my page started saying that. So, and it's interesting your career, Tony, because you were drafted by the Spurs, and of course you ended up ending your career with the Spurs on a very high note. So kind of cool how that ended up being like that. In 1990, do you think, where did you think you were going to be drafted? Did you think you're going to be drafted, and where did you want to go?
Well, honestly, in 1990, I want to go to Chicago Bulls. They were Michael Jordan, and we saw how good the Bulls were. Like, they didn't won a championship yet, because that would be the Detroit Pistons, the bad boys. But we saw what the Chicago Bulls were. So the projections were, at that time when I came out, I could go as early as late first, or second round. And more likely, my agent will say, you'll probably go higher in the second round. There's a chance you might get in on the bottom of the first, but you're probably going to be looking at the second round. So I ended up going 43rd, and when the Spurs picked me, I was a little upset that I didn't go earlier. But when the Spurs picked me, I was like, oh, David Robinson, Sean Elliott, Rod Strickland, Larry Brown. Yeah, okay, I think I can do that. I can. So I was happy. Once I thought about and the Spurs had made, I think, to the Western Conference Finals the year before, so they were a good team, and I was happy to be going to a winner. But at that time, you got to remember, if you're a second round pick, you kind of had to make the team. And a lot of second round picks didn't make the team. It was a 50-50 shot, once you got to the second round at best. And so I knew I still had some work to do, but I was definitely up for the challenge and was thrilled to be drafted by the Spurs.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Admiral and David Robinson, another guy that I think sometimes gets forgotten, all the great players in that era. I mean, what a great player, and on both ends of the floor. What was it like playing with him as a big man, and what did you learn from him?
Well, first of all, outside of Lenny, David Robinson was the biggest star I had ever been around. I had experienced star power with Len Bias, but I had not experienced star power on an NBA level. And so when I come into the league, David Robinson, 7'1", see muscles everywhere, chisel cut out of stone. And I'm like, man, I got to get on his workout program. What David Robinson. So I know I'm not going to grow anymore, but man, I sure wish I could play like that. So I watched him be the quintessential professional on and off the court, gracious to people, one of the nicest guys I ever met, hard worker, over the top professional, and just a guy that made you want to be the best version of yourself. Deep in his faith and his religion, and a family-oriented guy. Met his mom and dad and his brother. And so just a great veteran to be around. Him and guys like Terry Cummings and Harold Presley, and these guys, Paul Presley, David Greenwood, Sidney Green, Antoine Carr. These guys were my vets, and they played my position. So, I learned, okay, what's expected of a big man at the pro level. And so, Larry Brown has sat me down and gave me the speech as a rookie is what to expect and what he expected from me and what I needed to do to make an impact on the team. So my freshman year was really learning process. And I ended up my second year, I ended up being released from the Spurs, and I ended up doing signed with the Charlotte Hornets. Was there for a month or so, and then I ended up doing a few 10 days. Basically played for 4 teams that year. In that 1 year, I played for 4 teams in my second year, and then I ended up in Europe playing for FC Barcelona. For 2 years, I ended up in Europe, and 1 year I played for FC Barcelona, won championships, and was top 5 best players in all of Europe. So at that time, when you ended up in Europe, a lot of times it was kind of like a death sentence, meaning okay, you didn't make the NBA, you end up in Europe, never be heard from again. And I never had that mentality. My whole thing was I didn't get to play much my freshman year. So I didn't get the opportunity my second year, and I got released. I just needed to play. And once I got to play, I knew I was a good player, but I needed to play. So Europe was where I got to play and improve. And when I went to Europe, I said, hey, I'm not a European player. I'm an NBA player, but I got to come here to prove to these people in the NBA that I can play. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to be one of the best, and then they'll see. And that's what happened. The Clippers actually saw me playing in the All-Star game in Rome, and I was a standout there. Should have gotten MVP of the game, but I got robbed. But that's another story. They gave it to the guy who was playing from a team in Italy. We were playing in Rome, and then they gave it to the guy who was playing for one of the teams in Italy. So Spain kind of All-Star game. But I caught the attention of the Clipper scouts and Elgin Baylor. And that summer, they gave me a 2-year contract after seeing me play in Europe. And then I would go on to play for, roughly 12 more years in the NBA after those 2 years. So.
Well, and I remember that Clippers team very well because I think it was Terry DeHare and you had Loy Vaught and Lamont Murray. And I remember because that was when I was like probably 12, 13 years old. We'd have all the magazines and we knew every roster. And I remember Tony Massenburg. I remember, all you guys. I remember I think Eric Piatkowski was on that team, and the late Malik Sealy.
Loy Vaught, Pooh Richardson.
Who? Yep.
It was a Stanley Roberts. And let me tell you something. Stanley Roberts made such a difference on that team. The only problem was he had a serious knee injury that he was trying to come back from, and he never was able to really get back. But he played a couple of games with us, and Bill Fitch, who was the coach at the time, said, you know what? We're going to play a big lineup, fellas. He's like, Massenburg, you're not going to play center. You're going to play forward. Loy Vaught, you're not going to play 4. You're going to play 3. Malik Sealy, you're not going to play 3. You're going to play 2. Terry DeHare, you're not going to play 2. You're going to play 1. So, we had a team like that. And when Stan was there, we gave people problems. We gave people problems because that's how dominant Stanley Roberts was. Stanley Robertson, you got to remember, played with Shaquille O'Neal at LSU and was the better big of the two.
Yep.
Even tell you that to the day that when he was a freshman, Stanley Roberts was a better player than he was. And so when I look back on that team, man, we had a great team. Like, Lamont Murray was a freshman and was a rookie and a great player. And for you to remember that tells me a lot about, man, what you know about 90s basketball, because we were not a great team, but we had some pretty good talent on that team.
I mean, I love those are the teams I love back then. I watched everybody, of course, but I love the teams that maybe weren't as good or didn't give as much recognition, but they always had a lot of individual talent. Those to me were the most, and there's a lot of teams back then like that. And I remember the Clippers always had a lot of individual talent. It just, they never put it together, like you said. And
didn't win consistently.
Exactly. And so I find that, I remember that team very well. I think I might have even had a Loy Vaught jersey. I used to collect 90s jerseys back when I was a kid. I have like 72 of them still. And I think I have a Loy Vaught. I'm pretty sure I have a Loy Vaught, or maybe it's someone from the mid 90s Clippers. I'll have to look who it is, but I definitely have someone from your era. It's pretty,
Loy was there for a while.
Yeah, Loy was there exactly. And I think Bo Outlaw was there at that time too. Yep.
I was like, this is somebody. That was my guy, Bo Outlaw. Think about that. And Bo went on to have a great career because of the stuff that he was doing with the Clippers. He was a very young player at that time. Like, he was like a second-year guy at that time. And just, even then we were like, man, this dude, is not the biggest guy, but man, he makes an impact on the court.
I love, and when he went to Orlando, he was the same way. He was
Orlando.
Yep. Yep. And I remember, that whole era was so interesting. And I look back at your career now, and I know that you were taken in the expansion draft in '95 by the Raptors. You got to play for both the Raptors and the Grizzlies. So give us a quick overview of both of those teams, and what was it like playing for two brand new franchises?
You got to remember the Raptors, and you said it right there. I was in the expansion draft there, second pick in the expansion draft. Benoit Benjamin went to Vancouver as a first pick, and I went to Toronto as a second pick. And so Toronto was, obviously brand new, really embraced the team. Damon Stoudemire was the rookie draft pick at that time, and sort of, the guy that, Isaiah, who was the president and general manager, or president of the organization at that time, they built the team basically around him. And it's so funny because Damon Stoudemire was a lot like Isaiah, as a point guard, scoring point guard, played bigger than he was, and was a great leader. And so that was an interesting team that we had there. We didn't win, obviously the first year of expansion, but it was an interesting team. Now in Vancouver, I didn't get there until 1998. So the team had already been there a few years, and they were, basically trying to get the team to be competitive, which was real tough in the West at that time, really tough. But the city of Vancouver, I thought was beautiful. I had never played played for a team in the Northwest at that time, and so that's about as far northwest as you could go in Vancouver, literally out of the country. So I loved it. The people were great. The only thing was at that time, by the time I got to Vancouver, the rumblings amongst players in the NBA about the taxes was at an all-time high. Guys were not digging having Canadian tax taken out of their checks because they were playing, for a Canadian team. So that ultimately discouraged a lot of people from wanting to come to Canada. And ultimately, the team was not winning. And so guys wanted to put themselves in situations where they could win. But ultimately, Michael Heisley, who owned the team, eventually moved the team to Memphis. I made that move with the team. I got there in '98, but I was traded to Houston in '99, and I signed back with Memphis in 2000. Signed back with the Grizzlies in 2000, and the team moved to Memphis in 2001. So, that was the end. I was there, for the beginning of Toronto and the end of Vancouver.
And it's funny because you meant that Toronto team in 95, 96 actually beat the 72-10 Bulls. That was one of their 10 losses.
Yep, exactly.
And you actually play with one of my buddies, Kenny Thomas, on the Rockets.
Yeah, good dude, man. He was a rookie when I was in Houston. I tore my groin muscle in '99 after being traded there from Vancouver. Tore my groin muscle, missed the entire season, and signed back with the Grizzlies in Vancouver in 2000, and ended up with them making that move to Memphis in 2001.
Yep. I told Kenny you're going to be on the show. He's like, man, I play with Tony. They tell him I said hi. I'm like, I will.
Tell him I said, hey, man, that's a good dude, man. I always thought Kenny Thomas was a little bit underrated as a player. Always
sure.
liked, but it was, once again, it's one of those, Kenny came up in the tail end of the era where you had to have a position. Mm-hmm. Kenny would have been better in this league than he would have, because he was doing a lot of the stuff that his versatility is what enabled him to be a pro in the first place. But it would be more appreciated now than it was then.
No question about it. And he was actually the smallest player in the NBA to average a double-double in 2004 at 6'7".
Yeah, he was a problem around the basket. I mean, he was active, and he could get his shot off quick, and just a good player.
Yep, no question about it. I'm glad because when I told him, I said, tell Tony I said hi. That was cool. I was having you on the show. So I want to get to the 2004-05 Spurs at the end of your career now. So you go back to San Antonio, which is so cool that you started and ended with them. And And Tony, that's kind of one of the forgotten Spurs championships as far as you always, the last one with Kawhi and they beat the Heat, and of course the first couple with the Admiral and Tim. But that one, I think that's one of the greatest finals I've ever watched was that Pistons Spurs, '05 series. And they're very evenly matched teams in many ways. I mean, you had the Wallace brothers and, Big Shot Bob, and you had, Tayshaun and Rip. And then, of course, you guys were loaded with the big three and all the guys you had. So when you look back at that series, give me some of their favorite memories of that series and how great was it, at the end of your career to win a championship?
Well, it was an unbelievable series, and went full seven, and uh, the turning point in that series was when we lost one of our games in San Antonio because the format was different then. Remember, it was two at home. If you were the favorite, it was two at home, three in the other team's arena, and then two back at your place. And so when we lost one of the first two, that meant we were going to Detroit down one game. And with Detroit having three games at home, they knew they were going to close us out. And I remember the fans, rabid fans, as you know, Detroit fans are. In fact, so bad that we actually had to fly our families back home after flying them to the game. The team flew the families to Detroit to spend that time, to us to be able to have some time with our families, with us being there for three games and to have that support. And by the first game, we played the first game, and the fans were so rude to our families, to our kids, to our loved ones, our moms, our parents. They were so bad that the organization made the decision to fly everybody back.
Wow.
The players wouldn't worry about what was going on in the stands with our families, because a couple of us had gotten concerned because we saw some things, and our families were telling us some things that were being said and how they were being harassed. And that really got under our skin. And so with us being in Detroit and the air in Detroit, the people feeling like, you guys are not getting out of here. We got you. We're not going back to San Antonio to play any more basketball. And I never forget, they had us on the ropes, and with about 15 seconds to go, Big Shot Bob hits a three. That actually was less time than that on the clock, maybe like under 5 seconds, where he really sealed the game for us, where, okay, you guys are, it doesn't matter now. Like, you're out of hand. I can't remember exactly what the score was, but I remember that game being a turning point. And we said, we win this game tonight, fellas, we win this championship, because when we get back to San Antonio after what we've been through here in Detroit, there is no way we will let them beat us in San Antonio. And so our mindset was, we just need one. We're here for 3 games. We just need one. We got that one. And when we got back to San Antonio, we closed the show. And I remember sitting there on the bench with about 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and the game is still in the balance. Like, we're not, it was still nip and tuck back and forth. But I remember having this feeling of calmness and thinking to myself, I know the game's still going on and it's not over till the fat lady sings, but I'm about to win a championship right now. It's taken me 15 years professionally to get to this point. This is going to happen. And that was the feeling on the team. Tim Duncan, who was, Manu, who was I think ended up getting MVP of the playoffs, was spectacular. Timmy was battling a knee injury. Tony was spectacular. Nazi Muhammad stepped up big time. Like, me and Nazi were kind of competing for minutes, and Pop went with the younger, bigger guy, to start alongside Tim Duncan, and it worked seamlessly. And I was more wanting to just be happy to be part of it. And so I couldn't do nothing but support my teammates, because being in my 15th season, I was like, I may never get this chance again. And so when we won it and the confetti's falling, and I got my oldest son out there at the time, and my parents and my mom is crying, and I'm there with my dad, and I'm thinking about, everything that he sacrificed, for me to go to basketball camps and everything. It was a surreal moment, and something that I truly will never, ever forget. But that feeling of confidence, that was the best team I ever played on. And the feeling of confidence on a nightly basis when I walk into an arena of, we're going to beat you, right? Like, I had never had that before. It was always like, okay, boy, I got my hands full tonight. I don't know if I hope we don't get blown out, depending on who we're playing, But to be on the other side, to be playing, and you've got, 3 Hall of Famers, and you got the all-time greatest coach, in my book, he's the all-time greatest coach, and Greg Popovich. It was just an unreal feeling, and to get to the mountaintop and be a part of that, man, is something I always cherish.
And Tony, what made that team? Because again, as you look at dynasties, they still aren't always mentioned as the all-time greats. They won 5 championships over 20 years. So, and they probably could have won even more. I mean, who knows what could have happened. And looking back at the big 3, it would end up being with Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan. What made them so special?
The fact that they were unselfish superstars. There were never any riffs about shots. There were never any riffs about who's going to take the last shot. 3 Hall of Famers who were team players. That's what made them special. They were team players. They were grit and grind guys. They don't have the reputation of grit and grind, but they're grit and grind guys. Tim Duncan worked endlessly to be as good as he was. He was talented. He was big. He had some of the softest hands catching the basketball and the moves around the basket. And he could shoot the basketball out to the 3-point line, even then, as a big. Tony Parker would do everything you needed your floor general to do to win a basketball game. Manu Ginobili would make plays when there seemed like there was no play to be made. He would make a play. And not only would he make a play, he would make the play at the right time. And those 3 guys trusted each other. And because of that, it would allow, the other 12 guys to just kind of fall in line. And like, the tone is set with these 3. If they are the superstars of the team and they're doing the quote unquote dirty work that needs to be done sometimes to win games, then, the rest of us clearly know what it is that's expected of us. And we're going to deliver. We're not asked to really do the heavy lifting. They're doing the heavy lifting. So when you see guys that are willing to, as superstars, do the hard stuff, that just sets the tone for the team. And that team was physically tough. It was big. It wasn't pretty basketball, meaning, we weren't flashy, but we were very effective. And you would not take us out of what it was that we wanted to do. And at the end of the day, once again, just like Len Bias, my freshman year, I had an ace in the hole. Tim Duncan's an ace. That's an ace. That's a horse. I got one of those, and not everybody has one of those in their stable. Mm-hmm. So that also gave everybody the confidence that, man, we can win anytime we step on the court. We should win.
The way you guys played reminded me a little bit of the 80s, 90s Utah Jazz with Stockton and Malone, a Hornacek, and how they would pass the ball, and no one really needed it. They just always moved, and it was very unselfish. And they never won a championship, of course, but they got close. And you guys just see, watching the Spurs team, I loved watching that Spurs team because it was a lot of cutting and back cuts and just the way you guys played. You never knew who was going to take the last shot. Like you said, there wasn't that number one closer necessarily, like a Jordan or LeBron, or it was kind of, you never knew, would it be Tim inside, would it be Tony taking the shot, big shot Bob, Manu, you never knew.
Yep, and that's what made the team so good. You didn't know, like I said, when I told you about the shot, that Big Shot Bob hit in Detroit. Well, he wasn't one of the big three, but he hit a shot that was as big as any one of the big three hit all year, and lifted us, past the Detroit Pistons in Detroit and enabled us to get back to San Antonio and close the deal. So, and he continued to do that throughout the entire playoffs. So, when you look at that combined with the way that the big three went about their business, that's why that team was so good.
And what about Coach Pop? Give us a brief description of, what made him so special. What was he like to play for him?
Coach Popovich took a lot of his coaching style and his approach to accountability from Larry Brown. What he did with Larry Brown's formula was he didn't use Larry Brown's formula to a T. He took elements and then he perfected it with the ability to talk to players in a way that allowed him to get his message across without agitating the player. He evolved to something that Larry Brown kind of struggled with his entire career as far as how he wore on players over time. Pop wore on guys in a way that made them trust him as time went on. He won guys over. And when you win over the star player to the point where you can get in his face, and criticize him in front of the rest of the team, that helps you set the tone and the culture for your organization. If you can coach the best player on the team, then that sends a message that everybody else has got to be coachable in order to be here. And so Pop would always make everybody accountable, and that would win the respect of most of the guys on the team, because they recognize he doesn't really play favorites here, and that's kind of unusual, in this business. Usually the franchise guy is the guy and everybody knows it and he gets away with more than everybody else. And, other guys, you got limitations, but this guy doesn't, kind of thing. But, Pop holds everybody accountable. And because of that, they have a culture that's unmatched in San Antonio.
Wow. It's really neat to hear that from someone who actually played there and experienced that, because again, one of the greatest dynasties of all time. And I don't think the Spurs get enough respect for how great of a dynasty they were for those 20 years. I mean, they're still, successful, but I mean, they were 5 championships. You can't argue that.
Oh, you can't argue that. That's it's hard enough to win 1, let alone 5. Exactly. You win 5.
And the thing I think that makes them most impressive too, Tony, is they did it with multiple regimes. I mean, you had the Admiral was there for the first few, and then Sean Elliott, those guys. And then, of course, you had your teams, in 05 and then 07, and then you had the Kawhi teams at the end. So they did it in multiple ways, and it shows how brilliant Coach Pop and the whole organization is.
Speaks to the culture.
Yep.
Winning.
No question about it. And a couple more things I want to get to. I first want to thank you for even coming on. This has been awesome to talk to you. And I can have, all you 80s and 90s players, I can have you guys on all day long. I just love listening to your stories. I think it's such an amazing era. And what you guys experienced and the players you guys played against. And it's incredible talking to you guys, especially, talking about Lenny. I want to take it back, the day he passed away. How did you find out? And how was the grieving process for you that next year?
Well, I talk about my book, Lessons from Lenny. I was awakened by teammate David Gregg, who was actually in the room with Lenny at their party. One other player, there were, 2 teammates along with Len Bias and Lenny's friend, Brian Tribble, who were there. So 4 guys in the room. And at about 5:30, 5:15 in the morning, I hear a, knock at the door, and I answer the door, and there's David Gregg. And he's relatively distraught, and he's saying that, Lenny's been rushed to the hospital. And so, me and my teammates, we, get together and we rush down to the hospital, throw on our clothes, and rush down to see what's going on, with our guy. And we're there for half hour or so, and then his mom comes in, and she immediately goes to the back, and then she stays back there probably 25-30 minutes, and then she comes out from behind a door. And so we're all sitting in the waiting room, and she comes out from that door, and we all look up at her, and we're expecting her to, tell us like, oh, Lenny had a bad reaction to something he ate, or, Lenny had some type of asthma issue that we didn't know, something along those lines of basically a report on what happened, to Lenny. And she literally says, he's gone. And so there's like a 1 to 2 second delay for us to process what she means when she says he's gone. And it wasn't long before we realized that she meant he's not gone to another hospital. He's not gone, to another part of the, this hospital. He's gone. And so when, all of us realized what she meant by that, because we were stunned, to say the least. She had no emotion. She had no tears in her eyes. She was not even somber. She was matter of factly like, I'm just telling you guys that he's gone. And so, we all, just pandemonium after that. We all lose it because we can't believe what we heard. And so that was one of the saddest days, if not the saddest day in my life. Tragic. I was 18 years old. I struggled to process that emotion because I had never experienced loss on that level. I had lost, a couple of teammates in high school, but not, like that, and it did not, I struggled with that. So, and everything that happened afterwards is just, just a fallout from it.
And Tony, I lost my best friend at 19 to suicide. And it's one of those things where like, it doesn't just go away 6 months later. You always have that kind of hole in your heart for the rest of your life, really. And that's why with the grieving process, I always tell people at that age, like you're talking about, and that big of a loss, you don't process it quickly. It takes years to really process everything. And I'm sure it took you years. And even to this day, I'm sure you still, obviously you think about him still. And, how with the grieving process, like what did you do to get over? I know you kind of worked on your game. Is there anything else you did to kind of help yourself?
That's what I did. I immersed myself in basketball, lifting weights, and trying to block out what was being said about us, and what was being said about Lenny. That was it for me. I thought about transferring. I thought seriously about leaving. But then I quickly realized, this isn't something I'm going to be able to run from. Because if I leave, I'm going to go to another college campus, no matter where it is, and I'm going to be that guy. That guy from Maryland that was, played with Len Bias. He's probably a drug addict, because those are the kind of things that were being said about us. And so, after talking with my family, I decided that, and my teammates, because, we were all talking about leaving. And we all decided that, you know what, no matter where we go, this is going to follow us. And so why not just stay here, amongst the family of guys who are all going through the same thing. And then we try to get through this together. And nobody from my freshman class actually transferred. We had other guys transfer, but all of the freshmen stayed there. The guys who, except for one transferred, one that was, in the room with Lenny. There was one guy in the room, David Gregg, and he eventually went to another school. But, you could see why. He was actually there and was with Lenny and in the room with him. So for the rest of us, who were not there and who were not, partaking in any of that, we just had to deal with the stigma, of what had happened. And so we decided that, we're going to stay here and finish what we started. And that's what I did. But for that year, though, it was just trying to block out the noise, lifting weights, playing basketball. I'd be in the gym at, 12 o'clock at night to, 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes. I'd be lifting weights at midnight, which is not something I would do now, but I did it then sometimes because I couldn't sleep. And, I would go to the gym sometimes late at night because I couldn't sleep. So, I dedicated myself to, academics and just, immersing myself in the game of basketball.
And as far as the book Lessons from Lenny, what inspired you and Walt to write it, and where can people find that book?
What inspired us to write it was we wanted to talk about, because Walt Williams also idolized Len Bias the same way I did. He's 2 years younger than me. He actually met Lenny as a 16-year-old and got a chance to play a pickup game um, in College Park one day with Len Bias and Keith Gatlin as a 15 to 16-year-old. I think he said he was 15, actually. And so he loved Len Bias. And like a lot of PG County kids, wanted to be Len Bias. And so when Walt eventually got recruited by Maryland, because he was not recruited by Maryland, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know that, but Walt actually recruited Maryland. He got coach from the University of Maryland to come to one of his high school games to see him play. Because for some reason, we just were not recruiting Walt Williams at that time. And he really wanted to come to Maryland because of Lenny, and nobody knew. So upon Coach Wade sending one of his assistants to Crossland High School to see this kid that his high school coach had called up to Maryland, telling them about, who was also being recruited by Georgetown and UNC at the time, but was not being recruited locally by Maryland. And so they go up there and watch him play. They love what they saw. And then, eventually offered him a scholarship. And he came. And when he got there, as a freshman, I recognized the talent that he had right off. Gerard Mustaf was the elite signing that year. He was in the class with Walt Williams, and Gerard was a guy that Maryland had recruited since he was a freshman, at DeMatha. So he was a big time signing. But I knew that this kid, this other kid that y'all signed with, Gerard Mustaf, Walt Williams, this kid's a good player. Like, I didn't, I've never seen him, didn't know who he was, but he can play. So you fast forward, as Walt, starts to emerge a little bit in his sophomore year. And we're talking, just, as we often would, because he would sometimes ask me questions about Lenny. And then we really dive into it one day, sitting in Cole Fieldhouse, sitting in the stands, just talking. And he starts to tell me about how much he, idolized Len Bias and what he meant to him growing up and how it impacted him, when he died. And I just kind of was like, wow, I didn't know you were that big of a Lenny fan. You can't really be from PG County and not be a Len Bias fan, but Walt was a huge fan, and a great player. So you fast forward, and we decide that 10 years later, after coming back to the University of Maryland, he and I would have organized the pickup games at Maryland during our pro careers, and that team that won the championship in 2002 was a beneficiary of our pickup games. And those guys will tell you that. We, at that time, Walt and I would make sure that there were at least 15, there were always at least 10 to 15 NBA players in the gym 4 to 5 days a week during the summer. And we would integrate those University of Maryland players into those pickup games, playing against us and the other pros. And it made those guys better. They admitted it, that they got better playing against pros during the summer. And it ultimately, culminated with them winning the championship in 2002. I was actually able to come to that game because, remember, the Vancouver Grizzlies had moved to Memphis in 2001. And so when the NCAAs were happening in 2002, they were playing in Atlanta. Just so happened I had the day off that day for the championship game with Maryland playing I think it was Indiana. And I was able to hop a flight over from, short flight from Memphis to Atlanta, caught the game. One of my freshman teammates, Dave Dickerson, was an assistant coach who I had connected with Gary Williams some years earlier because there was a vacancy on his staff, and Dave, I thought, was a good coach and a great recruiter. And I put those two together, and it worked out. He was able to land the likes of Steve Francis and Juan Dickerson and Chris Wilcox. You know, he was one of the guys that was instrumental in assembling this team. And so I'm sitting there in Atlanta watching the confetti fall after the game. And me and Dickerson had a moment there right in the middle of the court where we just hugged each other and said, Lenny is with us right now, and he's smiling. He's smiling down on us right now, looking at this happen, because the connection that we had as freshmen, me putting him in front of Gary and hoping that he would get the job as an assistant coach for Gary, was a way of putting another piece of Lenny's legacy in play. And this was long before we thought about writing the book. But even then, when I thought about it, that's what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but that's what drove me to do that. And so when we're sitting there, me and Dickerson are hugging each other now, the confetti's falling, Maryland's won. And it was just a really surreal moment. And Gary, you know, acknowledged it all. And he talked about the role that Walt and I played in helping the program get to the point where, you know, they would win a championship, because we were coming back every summer doing that, you know, every summer we were doing that. So that's how we really ended up writing the book and talking about, we said, you know, we ultimately said, we're going to write this book and we're going to talk about the positive influence that Len Bias had on not just us as players, but on the players behind us, on the university, because of the changes that were made. The academic standards were raised. The athletic department became a better, you know, athletic department. So we didn't look at it like Bias ruined the program. He died, but there were a lot of lives that were saved because of his death. His mother has the greatest quote, I believe, to really sum it all up. And she says, and I quote, Lenny touched more people in death than he could ever have in life. And he impacted people in a way that changed their lives more than he could have ever done on a basketball court. So I felt it was important that people understand the positives that came from his death, because there was so much focus, so much scrutiny on how he died and the things that happened afterwards. You could not have two of the University of Maryland's most prominent basketball players talk about the positive influence that Len Bias had on them without acknowledging Len Bias's greatness. And I have never been one to believe that people should be defined by the way they die. I think they should be defined by the way they live. And if you look at the way Len Bias lived and the impact that he had on the game, the people who actually knew him, what he did and what he accomplished, it is noteworthy. And it's something that, you know, all-time greats are made of. So that's what spawned us to write that book.
Wow, what an amazing story. And your career, just listening to you talk about it, there's so many full circle moments, that Maryland winning the championship in 02, and you get to experience that and think about Lenny, and then 05 winning your championship with the team that drafted you. And then, of course, now writing the book about Lenny. All these full circle moments really came together nicely for you. And to see all that happen, it's really incredible.
It really is. It's something that you couldn't script it. You couldn't script it. I mean, there's no way that you get drafted in 1990 and you literally play for 12 teams and you end up right back where you started the very last year of your career and you win a championship. I mean, hey, you can't make that up.
No, it's amazing. It really is. And this the last question I have for you, and I ask this to every guest. I love hearing the answer. When you look back at your career, what do you want people to know about the legacy of Tony Massenburg?
When I look back at my career, I want people to just be able to look at me and say, I didn't cheat the game. You knew what you were going to get when you saw number 44 or number 34. I wore the number 34 2 years of my career, only because those were the only 2 years I could wear it. It wasn't available to me. But if it were up to me, the day I got drafted, I would have been wearing number 34 jersey. But Terry Cummings had that jersey when I was a rookie. So when I look back at my career, I was inspired by Len Bias, but I gave it my all. And if I played in your city, I may not have been the star of the team, but you would appreciate what it is that I did. I was consistent, and I was always about winning. Even though I didn't always win, I was always played winning basketball. And I always say, I may have been a more popular player had I been a little bit more selfish, but just selfish basketball and playing for stats is just, I could not force myself to play that way. I had to play team basketball. I had to pass the ball to the open man, even if I felt like I could get a shot off. I just would not feel good not making the right basketball play. It's just not the way I play. And so I think people who really know me know that about me. I'm a hard worker, and like I said, if you saw me on your roster, you knew that, okay, when that guy gets in, you're gonna get some production. You're gonna get some points, you're gonna get some boards, you can get some defense, and some toughness. So I made my name on that, and that's really what a lot of people know me for.
And you're a champion. I mean, how many players play in the NBA and never will even sniff a championship,
There's some crazy statistics out there when you really look at it. There's only a limited number of guys who have ever even won a championship. There's only 450 guys in the NBA every year. So there are not that many guys that have actually even, set foot on an NBA basketball court, and the league's roughly 70 something years old, 75 years old, whatever it is. There are not that many guys that have been fortunate enough to play, and even less to win championships. There have been some all-time greats that have not won championships. Mm-hmm. So I consider myself very lucky and fortunate. I tell people it took me 15 years. I played that long before I actually got a chance to be in position to win a championship.
You were saying some of them. I mean, Dominique, Ewing, Malone, Stockton, none of those guys won. I mean, Reggie Miller, Charles Barkley, those are all-time greats. Never won a championship.
Never won a championship. Yep. So it is truly special.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And where can people find Lessons from Lenny?
Lessons from Lenny is available anywhere books are sold. Or you can get the personal autograph copies from Walt Williams and I through lessonsfromlenny.com. Which is where we have all of our books autographed when you get them from us. But anywhere that books are sold, you can find Lessons from Lenny.
I'm definitely going to grab a copy of the signed one too. I'm gonna talk to Waddell about that. I'll get that for sure because I want to have one for my bookshelf.
We'll hook you up with that.
That'd be great. Well, Tony, thank you so much for coming on. And again, it's been awesome talking to you. I didn't know even as much of a basketball fan as I am. I never knew a lot about Len Bias, only from what my family in Boston would tell me. And then, my brother and some of his friends who watch college basketball, they told me how great he was. But from someone who actually played with him and knew him, it was just incredible to hear the stories. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing all that.
Hey, I always tell people, if you want to really know who Len Bias was without having to go through the entire archive, just look at that North Carolina game. Go to that Carolina game, 1986, first loss ever in the Dean Smith Center. You will barely recognize me because I actually had hair at one point. Little skinny kid at that time. I was, an inch shorter than I am now and several pounds lighter. But, I played in that game, but I got to be honest, man. I barely remember playing that game because I was in awe of what I was looking at my freshman year. Like, that is what I signed up to the University of Maryland for. So, that game in 1986, the plays that he makes, it really encapsulates his entire career. His athletic talent, his will to win. Watch that 1986 game because it's a classic game. And you will get a very good feel for who Len Bias was overall.
Well, thank you again for coming on. And I want to say, anybody watching, please go grab your copy of Lessons from Lenny. And I can't wait to get mine and read it. I'm really excited about that. So, yep. Tony, again, thank you for coming on, man. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me, man. Anytime. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Tony. Take care.